Sponsored by Witch Song Miniatures, the #1 most subscribed to tribe on My Mini Factory. Hey, it's Lyla. Today I'm testing out new techniques with the goal of getting the boring parts done faster so I can skip ahead to the good parts and hopefully improve my relationship with my hobby. When I sit down with a new project, below the excitement, there is always the slow burning barrier to me enjoying the miniature. Putting down those first few layers of paint. My favorite part of miniature painting is the tiny details. So when it comes time to applying my base coats, color blocking, or really starting the painting process in general, I just want to get it done as soon as possible. The fact that my miniature painting frustration starts right at the beginning is sort of a problem. So let's see if I can find ways to speed it up and find out if that helps with the enjoyment of my hobby. There are two basic concepts that I can see to speed up these first few steps of painting. The most obvious answer is to find techniques that will allow me to paint my miniature faster. But before that, we need to talk about one of the most basic decisions that can make or break your model. Knowing what colors I need to reach my goal, and more importantly, where to put them. I want to have my colors picked out ahead of time because I tend to build up my highlights and shadows slowly with no clear direction until I happen upon it. While this push and pull is part of what I enjoy, I want to set myself up to reach those tones faster by having at least a general idea of how dark and light I want my highlights and shadows. To start simply, I want to paint this model's armor gold. Along with my main color, I need to choose my highlights and shadow colors. These extra colors will work together to make my gold look realistic. NMM is not the focus of this video, so don't worry about that. I'm using a tried and true color recipe for this model: magenta, burnt sienna, mustard, gold, and a very light cool yellow. My colors are pretty complex, but a simplified version might look something like this. Since this is my usual gold NMM recipe, I know this will be everything I need from beginning to end, which is actually really nice and makes me feel a lot more confident going into this project. Maybe I should give color recipes more credit than I originally thought. Of course, having a perfect color recipe and knowing exactly every color you're going to use from beginning to end is not a requirement for this first step. The goal is to make painting easier, not to create an even bigger barrier to entry. So do your best. It's not like these are the only colors we will use. While choosing your colors is the foundation for faster painting, this knowledge won't speed up your painting without this next step: knowing where to place your paint. And I don't just mean on your palette, then your brush, then the miniature. As previously stated, I usually meander quite a bit when it comes to highlights and shadows. But for this experiment, I want to try and place my colors where I want them right off the bat. Or, well, approximately where I want them. I'm taking a photo of this model's zenithal priming to reference later, just in case. But since my goal is to apply the paint exactly where it needs to go, in theory, I can use the zenithal priming like a paint by numbers, matching up my black to my shadow color, gray to the mid-tone, and white to my highlight. Since this model is so big, I'm starting with the largest brush I can, because the more ground I can cover, the faster I can paint. I'm starting with the largest volumes, like shadows under the arms and mid-tones on the chest. I'll go back in and develop more detailed areas like the shadows and highlights of the pecs later. I went into this thinking I would do stippling for the majority of this model, but my smallest stippling brush is still too large to fit into the recesses like I want. Instead, I'm using a technique called scumbling. Yes, you heard that right. Scumbling. In all honesty, I'm just trying to get the paint off my brush as fast as I can, which is ending up with me just smashing my round brush into the model and making quick back and forth strokes repeatedly. Basically doing everything you're not supposed to do with a round brush that you like. To speed this up even faster, I'm also wet blending, which works really well with stippling and scrumbling. Both of these techniques leave behind an organic-looking brushstroke or texture. so any brushstrokes visible in our final paint won't be a problem. Learning to wet blend with either of these mark-making techniques will help you get the speed you need for wet blending, even if you aren't quite there yet with a round brush. The most important thing is to work quickly. If you're having difficulties wet blending, consider that the more similar your two colors are to each other, the easier they are to blend together. Before we continue, let's take a minute to talk about Witchsong Miniatures. Witchsong Miniatures specializes in huge, highly detailed miniatures. For November, I'm painting one of their 2 Stone War Sentries. If printed to scale, this model comes on a 4x4 base and is 200 millimeters tall. It's so big I couldn't fit it on my printer, but scaled down, it's just as gorgeous. For just $1 a month, you can get access to their highly detailed pre-supported miniatures and its correlating 5e D&D stat sheet. For just $3 a month, you get access to everything else, plus an oversized bust and a 50% discount on their My Mini Factory store, as well as access to seasonal and loyalty rewards. If you want to test before you commit, head over to Witchsong Miniatures' My Mini Factory page and download their completely free Faceless King STL file. Check out Witchsong today using the link in my description box. Alright, back to painting. This next step is one that I realized I was doing wrong, and I even told you all to do it wrong in my last video, which many of you pointed out to me. Apparently, if you do this technique the right way, this whole new world opens up to you and should make painting faster and hopefully more enjoyable as well. Apparently, this whole time, you aren't supposed to dry brush with a dry brush. So let's test it out. Using my own DIY dry brush sponge made from a hair donut and a plastic container, I'm adding 2 drops of water, shaking my container vigorously, and then dipping my domed brush into the sponge and then into my paint on my dry palette. You don't want the brush too wet, and it is definitely a learning curve that I have not yet mastered. Once my brush is dipped into my paint, I'm then removing my excess paint directly on my dry palette. Removing paint on your paper towel absorbs moisture from our paintbrush, which causes the chalky appearance dry brushing is known for. With my paint properly applied, I'm pulling it down my model very lightly, working only to hit the raised edges. I'm starting with my same mustard color over the sienna and magenta areas, then building up to my vibrant gold and then my pale yellow. Each pass applied lighter than the pass before. For the most part, the dry brushing worked really well, and I can definitely see the difference that using the damp brush made. It's still a learning curve I'm working on, and there were definitely several times that I dipped my brush into my sponge, into my paint, and then when removing the paint on my dry palette, realized the paint was too wet, which caused me to do the whole thing over again. We want enough water in the brush to help the paint flow off the bristles, but not so much that it dilutes the paint. I don't know, I'm still working on it. Before we get on to my favorite details, there is one last thing that we need to do to this model to kick it up a notch. It's a new twist on an old technique that is hopefully going to make this usually very boring and mundane step a lot more fun and faster. There are 2 problems with this model as it stands. 1, the dry brushing washed out my sienna and magenta areas. And 2, I still need to go back in and finesse some of those 3-dimensional areas, like the shadows under the large filigree pieces and the pecks. I hopefully can achieve both of these things with stippling and scumbling glazing. I'm doing the same motion as before, but this time with glaze consistency paint. I'm roughly applying magenta and sienna to areas in between the filigree and again in those shadow areas. I'm then intensifying gold areas by doing the same thing with my gold. And now it's on to the fun details that I love. Alright, that's it from me. If you like what I do, I'm planning on going full-time YouTube in the near future, and you can help make that possible by joining me over on Patreon, where you can get access to my Discord server, behind-the-scenes content, polls, ask me to critique your model, and even get access to my live stream/hobby hangout. If you like me and my content and the cats, please go join me on Patreon. Alright, thanks so much. I'll see you next time.